Hello friends, in the last video session we had a discussion on the three sectors theory, and we came to know of the three sectors which are there in an economy, including the primary, secondary and the tertiary sector. Now let us today take the case of India and let us understand why India presents us with a peculiar case. Now you can see on your screen we are basically trying to compare the three different sectors, that is the primary, secondary and the tertiary sector. You can see them listed one by one in the second, third and the fourth row. In the first column we have taken the same pictures, the ones which we discussed yesterday. So now we are going to compare them on two aspects. The first aspect is how much do they contribute to the overall jobs, overall employment opportunities in the country. That is, how much do they contribute to the employment generation in the country. And the second aspect is how much does each sector contribute to the overall value addition in the country, or technically speaking, overall GDP of the country. Now the figures are in front of you. You see the primary sector contributes 44% to the employment generation. However, its contribution to GDP is very less. It's just around 16%. We have the manufacturing sector which contributes around 25% to the job growth. But again, the contribution is somewhere around 23% only to the GDP. While the services sector, the tertiary sector, you would find that it is contributing to employment only around 31. That is, every one third of the total workforce is engaged in the tertiary sector or the services sector, but it is contributing almost 61% to the country's GDP. If you look at the contribution, you would certainly say that the tertiary sector, the services sector, scores much better than the other sectors of the economy. In fact, service sector alone contributes 61%, which is more than the primary sector and the manufacturing sector put together. So the majority of contribution to the GDP comes from the services sector, which means indeed service sector is very important to the economy of the country. But if you look at the employment column, you would find that primary sector has its own importance because it is contributing almost 44%. That is one half of the total jobs available in India. So one half of the total jobs that get generated in India, so one half of this total number is generated by the primary sector. So in that sense, primary sector has its own importance for the economy of the country. Now, do you find something amiss in this particular data? Do you find something that does not quite feel good, does not quite look good? See, if you have a look at the contribution to employment and contribution to GDP, we have seen that primary sector is generating a lot of jobs, but it is not generating that much GDP. On the other hand, the services sector, it's not generating that many employment opportunities, but then it is contributing a lot to the GDP. This in itself is a big problem. Ideally, what should have been the case, if a particular sector is contributing more to the employment, it should also contribute more to the GDP. However, this is not happening here. The services sector contributes just 31% to the overall jobs in the country, but it contributes almost 61% to the country's GDP. Now, what kind of problems this kind of a situation can create? Now see, number one, you see that if a particular sector is contributing more to the GDP, naturally it would get higher remuneration also. Naturally, if you are contributing more, you would get a higher remuneration, you would get paid more, and naturally these salaries would be higher, which means that the salaries should have been the highest, must have been the highest in the services sector because they're contributing more to the GDP. So naturally the remunerations have to be higher, while the earnings in the primary sector should be the lowest because the primary sector is not contributing that much to the GDP. On the other hand, there are more number of people in the primary sector, 44%, and less number of people in the services sector. Basically, what is happening in primary sector, more number of people are producing much less, while in the service sector, lesser number of people are producing much more. So naturally, the less people who are working in service sector, since they are producing more, contributing more to the GDP, they should get higher remuneration. They should be getting higher remuneration. On the other hand, those involved in agriculture, they should be getting relatively much lower remuneration, and their income levels should be relatively much lower. And this indeed is the case. That is why if you are given an opportunity to join your family, your father and grandfather in tilling the fields and growing crops, or working in a small firm in some metro area, you would certainly opt for the latter, because you know that service industries or manufacturing industries are going to pay you more than working in the primary sector. Now this creates some kind of inequity, income inequity. Those in the primary sector, they earn much less, while those in the services sector, they earn much more. And this kind of income inequality in income creates a lot of problem for the country. While the farmers remain poor, those who are working in the service sector or the tertiary sector, the service professionals, they earn much higher. Now, we should also understand that this is one reason why you are seeing and you are coming across news items which tell you about so many people who have left their traditional vocation of cultivating the fields for petty jobs in manufacturing firms or service firms in towns and cities. People have been quitting cultivation, agriculture, and they have been joining small firms and small service or manufacturing firms in faraway towns, and adding to the migration from rural to the urban areas. Second, since the agriculture is not, primary sector is not that much remunerative, people are also quitting primary sector, as I've already mentioned. And if this happens and this goes on unchecked, what will happen? This might cause problem to the food security of the country. This might endanger our food security, because ultimately those engaged in primary sector only produce food for us. You see that the lockdown is almost continuing, has almost continued now for almost 1 month, but we still do not have to worry too much, because there is a lot of food grains available in our godowns with the government, and which can always be distributed to the people. But if people start quitting agriculture altogether, then how are we going to manage our food production? And how are we going to ensure food security for the country? So this is another problem that is coming up with because of this. And thirdly, please understand, India is a country with almost 130 crore people, and we lead a lot of jobs every year. In fact, a study was conducted and it estimated that we need about 2 crore jobs to be generated every year. 2 crore new jobs should be added to the economy every year. But if you look at these figures here, you will find that the service sector is more efficient, and that is why it is less labor intensive. What do we mean by labor intensive? And service sector is less labor intensive, while the manufacturing and the primary sectors are more labor intensive. Labor intensive means more the number of people required to produce the same amount of output, higher is the level of the labor intensiveness. Is this okay? Now, to produce the same amount of output in service industries, you require much less number of workers, while in the primary and the manufacturing industries, to produce the same amount of output, you require more number of workers. Is this okay? Let us compare two different industries. For example, let us compare the automobile industry and the media, the news media, which is basically a service industry. In automobile industry, if you want to produce cars, let's say you are producing 1 lakh cars every year, you would require at least 1000 2000 workers working for you. On the other hand, and you are selling these 1 lakh cars, and you are, let's say, you are earning around, let's say, after selling these 1 lakh cars, let's say you are earning somewhere around 50,000 crore rupees. On the other hand, if you have a media outlet, you can run it with maybe 5 or 10 people and you can earn much more than that. So service industries are generally, service sector or the tertiary sector is generally much less labor intensive. It does not require that many number of people. On the other hand, primary and the secondary activities are more labor intensive. They require more number of workers to produce the same amount of output. This means that if you are a big country and you require lots of jobs to be generated every year, you should have a thriving primary and manufacturing sector rather than having a thriving tertiary service sector. We do not have any problem with the thriving service sector, but the manufacturing sector and the primary sector should also be working fine. Then only you will be able to generate the kind of jobs, the number of jobs that you want. And in India, the main problem is that we have a thriving service industries, we have a thriving service sector. You can see here, they are contributing almost 61% to the GDP, but we do not have a thriving manufacturing sector in the primary sector. And that is why they are not able to contribute that much to the GDP. And naturally, since they are not thriving, they are not progressing at a very good rate, there would be less number of jobs that would be generated in the economy, because the sector that is growing the fastest, that is the service sector, that tertiary sector, that particular sector is much less labor intensive, right? So the main issue with the country is that we do not have a very well functioning manufacturing sector. If we can somehow stimulate the growth in the manufacturing sector, and if we can somehow make it contribute more to the GDP, there would be a proportionate increase in jobs also, and that is the main requirement of the country as of now. So for a country like Norway, which only has a population of around 1.5 crore, they can manage to have a thriving service sector because they do not have that many people seeking jobs. But a country like India, which needs to generate 2 crore jobs every year, which needs to add 2 crore more jobs to the economy every year, we cannot do with a manufacturing sector, a secondary sector which is performing sluggishly, which is not at all thriving, which is not progressing at a rapid pace. And that is why the government very recently, around 4 or 5 years back, came up with the scheme Make in India. So basically what was Make in India all about? Because government understood if we want to have jobs, we need to have a thriving manufacturing sector, we need to stimulate the growth in the manufacturing sector, and that is why they came up with this particular scheme. Make in India scheme was government's initiative, Government of India's initiative, and the main objective of this particular scheme was to encourage the firms, industries to set up their production plants here in India. They can be foreign firms, so we will attract them to set up their plants in India, and if they are domestic firms, we will provide them so many facilities that rather than thinking of setting up their plants in some foreign country, they would set up their plants here in India. So that was the main objective behind the Make in India scheme, and the reason was we wanted our manufacturing sector to grow, because we know by its nature manufacturing sector is more labor intensive than the services or the tertiary sector. And if the manufacturing sector grows, then naturally we will have more number of jobs generated in the economy, which is the main issue facing the country as of now, right? So this is another thing. Now see, what actually happens is, it has been seen that generally when the economy of a particular country evolves, it actually goes through three stages. The first stage is when the primary sector is the predominant one, which means it is contributing the most to the overall GDP. Then the second stage is where the manufacturing sector becomes the predominant one and it starts contributing more, while the primary sector takes a backseat. And the third and the final stage is where the services sectors are the most developed and they are contributing, the service or the tertiary sector is contributing the most to the GDP. But as far as India is concerned, you would see that yes, we are in this stage 3, but the problem with us was we actually skipped stage 2. So we went from an economy in which the contribution of the primary sector was the largest, stage 1, to an economy where the contribution of the tertiary sector is the largest, stage 3, without actually going through stage 2. And because of that, we could never generate jobs for our youth. So this is one problem that India has been facing, and all the efforts that the government is making, they are basically trying to somehow stimulate the growth of manufacturing sector so that we can have more number of jobs generated, and this imbalance can be corrected and there can be more employment opportunities for the youth. So the whole idea behind this discussion today was to make you understand how the three sectors are contributing to the economy of the country in terms of the number of jobs that they are generating and in terms of the contribution to the GDP of the country, and also to make you understand as to what are the implications of this kind of a situation wherein the service sector has become a predominant sector in the Indian economy and the manufacturing and the primary sector, they are not able to contribute that much to the GDP of the country. I hope that you have been able to understand the discussion that has taken place in this particular session. I would request you to please go through this particular video again and again until unless you understand every single thing that I have mentioned, because whenever you are asked this particular question, whenever you are asked to do a critical analysis of the state in which the Indian economy is in, then probably this is some information that might help you in answering questions like this. So please go through the video again and again. Do pause the video whenever you find that you are not able to understand something, and listen to the video again so that you understand all these things better. As I've said already, in case you come across any problem, you can please address your queries to me, but only after having put in your efforts in trying to find an answer to that particular question. Thank you very much.